This is welcome to part 3 of the 4 defining dates within Jewish history. Last week we went through the rise and fall of Babylonian Jewry. We moved over to the rise of Spanish Jewry. We talked a little bit, thank you very much, Chasdai Ibn Shaprut, one of the great Jewish leaders during the early part of the Jewish ascent in Spain. And then we concluded with talking about one of the foremost great scholars within Jewish history, of course, Moses Maimonides, and the books that he wrote, the influence that he had on Jewry, and also the controversy which he caused, especially by writing the book of the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed, which is a philosophical tome to explain Jewish dogma versus other dogmas, and this caused a great uproar within the Jewish scholarship circles because Judaism always prided itself as not having any dogma. We're a nation of deeds. Let's stick to the mitzvahs. What people believe and how they believe, and especially when you start bringing out outside sources such as Greek philosophy and Aristotle, etc., etc. So you could imagine that it caused a great perplex within the Jewish community, till ultimately they burnt the Yad HaChazakah. I keep saying the Yad HaChazakah, I'm sorry. They burnt the Moreh Nevuchim, publicly, and they put a ban on the Moreh Nevuchim. And I think looking back, the people who did that, I don't think really understood it much. It's like amateurs trying to study in a professional league. I don't think they understood much of the Moreh Nevuchim, but nonetheless, this is what happened. So I think what I'd like to do tonight is, before we go into the German and Ashkenaz experience, under the Christians, let's continue a little bit on this vein of Spanish Jewry, because we're already in Spain anyways, and we're dealing with the Rambam, and we're there anyways. Let's take it to the conclusion at 1492, and then we'll backtrack a little bit and see what happens in Germany and in France. What their experience was there. The Christians, as I'd mentioned before, after the fall of Rome, went into basically a deep sleep. The western part of the Roman Empire, the Western Byzantium Empire, went into a deep freeze, and we called it, as historians call it, the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages, nothing much happened. As a matter of fact, not only did nothing much happen in progress, they basically went backwards. Everything that the Romans had built, architecture and culture and plumbing and whatever things, it all collapsed, basically. For hundreds of years, Europe was in a deep freeze. It all changed with a fellow by the name of Charlemagne, basically, who's the king of France, who unites Germany and France under one banner. He's a progressive kind of a king, quote unquote, and invites the Jews to come in, and we'll see later on, how the Jews fared under Charlemagne and his kingdom. But as far as Spain is concerned, as we mentioned last week, the Muslims were able to conquer. They went to the Pyrenees Mountains, they stopped there, and they were pushed back, and basically that was the borders. But the Christians always felt that Spain was there. It was Spanish, and it was Catholic. And eventually they began what they called the reconquest of Spain. And the reconquest of Spain started in the 12th century. And basically, in a number of years, they pushed back the Muslims all the way almost back to the borders, to the Mediterranean. Although for another 100 years or so, they would hold on to some part of the peninsula. But for the reconquest, now our purpose is talking about the Jewish experience. They're living in the Iberian Peninsula. The reconquest took place, pretty much in the end of the 12th and the early part of the 13th century, and the Catholics once again recaptured it. Now, when they recaptured it, it wasn't all under one ruler, the entire Spain. Spain was broken up into different municipalities, and depending upon which municipality you were and who was the ruler at that time, of course, made a huge difference in how they viewed the Jews and their experience. To give you an example, one of the great Jewish leaders, of that time was a fellow by the name of Moses ben Nachman, not to be confused with Moses ben Maimon. He was called Nachmanides, and he was a tremendous scholar, unbelievable scholar, and he was born shortly before Rambam's passing away. He was maybe 10 years old when Rambam passed away, but Rambam already was living in Egypt at the time, so he never had a chance to meet him. But here he grows up in this milieu really of Catholicism. I mean, it's no more Muslim, now it's Catholic. He grows up within this milieu. He's part of the controversy. I mean, he disagrees with the Rambam's writings in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed, but he doesn't agree to burn him. I mean, to burn Rambam, doesn't, and refuses to join the Rambam's opponents. Refuses. Now, when the Christians came in, they came also with a policy that wasn't as benign as many of the Muslims. And we talked about the Almohads last week, which was a fundamentalist Muslim group that tried to convert everybody. But for most part of the Jews living within Spain, as far as the Muslims were concerned, they came to some kind of an understanding. I mean, we're Muslims, you're Jews, you're second class, but you could still remain Jews. The Catholics had a different kind of a perspective in the world. I mean, they had a different program of converting everybody. I mean, they wanted to literally have the entire world Catholic. And the biggest affront to them, in one aspect, was the Jews. Because the Muslims, okay, they came from the Fertile Crescent, but the Jews had seen Jesus. They had lived with Jesus, and they never accepted Jesus. Yeah, and they killed him, thank you very much. So this to them became an affront, and they could never get over with. So they always had a program, an underlying program of trying to convert the Jews. Sometimes they did this mercilessly, as we'll see later on during the Inquisition, and sometimes they did it benignly. Just basically trying to educate them, trying to get them to understand, open up their eyes that, this is the real way, this is the truth, this is the path, this is the light unto salvation. And the Jews, for the most part, unless they were very pressured or under the fear of death, said, listen, we got our way, you have your way, let it be. And today we're going to begin with one of the more interesting episodes within Jewish history. It's called the Disputation. Now, what happened? What happened with the Disputation? In 1263, I'm very sorry, but I'm just going to turn this off. Nachmanides, lived what was his name? Barcelona. Thank you very much. He lived in Barcelona in Spain under the kingship of King John of Aragon. Okay? Now, King John of Aragon was, as far as we're able to glean from all of the writings, was one of these progressive kings. He was Catholic, staunchly Catholic, believed in the Catholic Church, but wasn't out to convert the Jews mercilessly. Wouldn't have mind, but because that if a Jew converts, it's always a star on your lapel. But you know what? Maybe he was lazy or whatever it was. He wasn't going to go out and tear out their fingernails, etc., etc. What happened? We're going to find this over and over again in Jewish history, that many times our biggest sonim, our biggest enemies, and the people that give us the biggest problem are not born Catholics, but converts. Jews that converted out. And among these people was a fellow by the name of Pablo Cristiani. Pablo Cristiani was a Jewish man who converted to Catholicism and came to the bishops there and said, hey, listen, you know why the Jews are not converting? Because you guys are going about it wrong. You're going about it wrong. What you're trying to do is, you're trying to pick them off one by one by one by one. It's very difficult to do that. What you got to do is cut out the root. If you cut out the root, then what happens to the rest of the tree? What happens? Thank you very much. So instead of starting at the top, with the little people up on top, let's go after the root. Let's go after the foundation, the big man, the number 4 hitter. All right? If you take him out, then of course everybody else is going to just follow suit right away. They said, who are you talking about? He says, there's one leader of Spanish Jewry today. His name is Rabbi Nachmanides. If we get him into the debate and we prove to him and we show him the truth of what we have, and he decides to convert, you're going to see hundreds of thousands of Jews following his path. They said, okay, but who's going to do the debating? Who else is going to do the debating? I'm going to do the debating. Okay, you're going to do the debating? Are you sure? Yeah, fine, no problem. I know what I'm talking about, and I know everything the Jews are up to, and I know all of their things. You don't worry. You put me up against him, I'm going to finish him off. Okay, King James said, hey, you know what? You want to have this debate? Are you sure? Yes. So he calls in Rabbi Moses and he says, Moses, I want you to debate Pablo Christianity. Moses said, absolutely not. Absolutely under no circumstances will I debate him. So King James says, why not? He says, first of all, the money's not that good. I mean, what are you offering? You're not offering that much money. Kick up a little bit the money. I mean, maybe we'll talk about it. No, he says, first of all, I'm a loser no matter what. If I lose, I lose. And if I win, I lose. So what do you? And second of all, you're going to tie my hands behind my back. I can't say what I want to say. If I say something wrong, then you're going to get this. No. But King James was under pressure from the Catholic Church. So he said to him, listen, I'll make an agreement with you. No holds barred. That's all. You say whatever you want and I'll protect you. So he said, listen, I'm only going to do this if you hold to your agreement. If you say to me that you let me say whatever I want to say, that means I could get up there and just blast away, then I'm willing to do it. But if you're going to keep saying, hey, you can't say that, you can't say this, you can't say that, you have to talk in only sentences with no vowels in it, it's not going to work. I want to be free to say whatever I want and question whatever I want. So he agreed. He said that the debate will be open and free. Now, I don't know what was going on in Pablo Christianity's head. I don't know, because if you go through Jewish history, the one thing we don't lack is not like great sports figures, because great Jewish sports figures are a very small book. Let's be honest. I mean, you have a few, yes, of course, Han Greenberg and this guy, that guy, a few here, there, Mark Spitz. We have a few. But if you talk about great Jewish scholarship, there's a book like this. What are you talking about? It's not. And of all the Jewish scholars throughout history, you may make a mistake in challenging, let's say, Perelmuter to a debate. Okay? And good chance you may win this debate. You may challenge other Chabad rabbis to this debate. Even Rabbi Kunin you may challenge to a debate. And you may win. You may win. But if you're going to pick someone to fight, you're not going to pick Rabbi Moshe ben Nachmanides. Okay, there's worse people. You could have picked Rambam. Okay, maybe he was a worse choice. Or maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was a worse choice. But pretty bad choice when you're going to choose Moshe ben Nachman. Because among all Jewish scholarships, the Ramban is considered one of the greatest, if not in the top 10, definitely in the top 20 for sure, of all time. Okay, so here goes Pablo Christianity in his own deluded mind, thinks that he's going to have a debate with Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. Okay, they start the debate. The first day already doesn't look too good, because he's already up on the ropes already. The second day it looks worse already. He's challenging him here, he's challenging him there, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He quotes a Talmud, he starts laughing at him. I mean, he doesn't know how to, he misquoted the whole Talmud. He doesn't know anything. I mean, basically this is a joke, of what's going on. On the third day, and by the way, all of this is recorded. This was all recorded, word for word, and there's a book called The Disputation. Now, whether that's accurate and exactly every word is written down in The Disputation, but you could buy it today in the stores. And there's a movie even about it. There's a movie called The Disputation. I'm sure it was edited.
What city was that in?
Barcelona. Anyways, to make a long story short, I just want to quote to you the last statement that he makes, Nachmanides, because this is where it all ends. Okay? Oh no, that already told him the first moment. He said, you know what, you know nothing. But here he's already addressing not only Pablo Christianity. He already by the third day, he sees that he's on a roll. So when he's on a roll, why should he stop at only bringing this guy down? He's going to bring down the whole Catholic Church already, as a matter of fact. So he says like this. This is what he says. The church comes as a prince of peace. But more blood has been spilled by Christians than by all the rest of humanity together. You have come on behalf of the poor, but no one has exploited the poor more than the church. The proof of eternal truth of Judaism is that a people like the Jewish people exists in this world. And the proof of the falsehood of Christianity is that there are people who act and behave like Christians. Now, okay? So if you say this today, and your name happens to be, what's his name, our friend, the atheist? Christopher Hitchens. It makes sense. But to say this in the 1300s, in Catholic Spain, in front of a room full of cardinals, bishops, priests, you're crazy. You happen to be nuts. So right away after he said these words, and everybody is like shaking and going wild, King James closes the debate. He says, shut up, no more talking. Okay, he kicks Pablo Cristiani out of the room, and he sends Moses Nachmanides to his office. Okay, he said, go to the office. Okay, I want to talk to you. He sends everybody home. He comes into the office and he says, I want to know something. Are you mentally insane? Are you actually crazy or something? You want to get yourself killed? So he says, what? He says, when we said we open up the debate, you can discuss philosophy, this, but then go and start knocking and kicking out the very foundations of the Catholic Church and about Christianity. What are you not? This is a Christian country. These are all Catholics here. They all want your head. I suggest to you, listen, do me a favor. Get lost. Okay? When I mean get lost, run. Because they're not going to want to convert you now. They're going to want to kill you. So he gave him 300 gold rubles, or whatever they were dealing at that time in Spain. He said, take these things and leave. Don't wait for your family. Don't wait for your children. Just get on a boat and go. So where's he going to go? The one place where the Catholic Church can't get a hold of him, and that happens to be Israel. So he decides, if I'm leaving, I'm going to Israel. This is before they discovered America. I'm sure if this was a few hundred years later, he may have gone to the Lower East Side. But right now, he's going to Israel. Okay? He's going to Israel. So he gets on a boat. He ends up in Israel, the Ramban, and he goes right away to Yerushalayim. Where else are you going to go? Yerushalayim at this time is under Muslim rule. He goes and he settles in Jerusalem. He settles in Jerusalem. He can't find a minyan. There's not enough people for a minyan in Yerushalayim. This is already the middle of the 13th century. There's no minyan in Yerushalayim. So what he does is he pays for the relocation of 10 families from Hebron. Hebron had a little community. He paid 10 families to move over to Yerushalayim because he wanted to live there. He established a shul, in Yerushalayim. And if you go today to the old city, to the Ramban shul, it's still there. Now, I'm not sure if it's in the exact spot with the same wood that he actually built it, everything, but you go to the Ramban Shul, you could see it. That's where he established, that's where it was. It's 700 years. I mean, you're talking about 1270. So how long is it now? It's 700 years. More. Almost 750 years. Almost 750 years since the Ramban came there. Later on, his family joined him, and he came there, and this, and it quieted down. But the debate shook the Catholics. It literally shook them. Because who has the audacity to say something like this? A chutzpah of a Jew to say something like this. And, when went around the whole town, the Rambam won, and all of a sudden the Jews are feeling good about themselves. So they decided now the next debate is not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same. The next debate is going to be without a guy like the Ramban. Make sure that no one like his caliber shows up. And in 1313, they decided that no more Mr. Nice Guy. That was the first of the pogroms right now in Spain. They killed tens of thousands of Jews. Later on in the century, they went into what they called the debate in Tortosa. It was not the debate in Barcelona. In Tortosa, they had a debate with 300 rabbis. They brought 300 rabbis to debate. But what they did was this went on for 3 years. The debate was a 3-year debate. Like every night they forced them to come and back and forth. Some came, some didn't come, they switched. They said at the end of the 3-year debate in Tortosa, 100 of the 300 rabbis converted. They couldn't take it anymore. I mean, the pressure was so strong about them that they basically converted. Later on, already in the 15th century, we all know what happened already there in 1420 and 1430. There was pogroms already, in Spain. And by the time, as the close of this century comes up, the Catholics decided, forget it. There was about, at the height, there was about 500,000 Jews living in Spain at this time. About 500,000, and under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and under the famous Torquemada, the head of the Spanish Inquisition, the Grand Inquisitor, which, by the way, many people misunderstand, that the Inquisition did not come to convert Jews. That was not the purpose of the Inquisition. The purpose of the Inquisition was to ferret out those non-believers within Catholicism. That's what it came to ferret out. It wanted to establish truth within Catholicism. So God forbid someone, a heretic, proclaiming that he was a Catholic, was seen that or heard the people were convinced that he wasn't what he proclaimed to be. He was accused of heresy. That's what the Inquisition was all about. Then they dragged him into a room and they forced him to repent, etc., etc., etc. It was not to establish a conversion of the Jewish people, but at the same time that the Inquisition was going on, tremendous pressure was put upon the Jews to convert. Pressure. Now, if a Jew converted, where does the Inquisition come in, and why is Torquemada hated so much? Because when the Inquisition now came in and a Jew converted, now the Inquisition took over. Is he a real Jew? Is he not a real Jew? And if you were not a real Jew, then what they did is if you're a real Jew and not a real Catholic, then they burnt you. They burnt you. Auto de fe was one of their famous things that they did. They burnt you alive and all of that stuff. Then they forced you to squeal on other people and who was and who wasn't. And this was the sadism. And this was the violence that they used upon what they called the new Christians. The new Christians. And of course the new Christians were always looked upon askance because why did they convert? Did they really want to convert? Did they not want to convert? They always never really trusted them. And even to the point that there was a point in time that they forbade new Christians from marrying old Christians. Even if you converted, you couldn't marry into a regular Catholic family. You had to only marry a new Christian, a new Catholic, because the church didn't believe that you really converted, that you were a fake Catholic. Okay? So this is what happened until ultimately, under his pressure, under the pressure of Torquemada, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand gave out a decree that by 1492, either you convert or you're history, or you're gone. And we know August the 2nd in 1492, which happened to just be Tisha B'Av. If you happen to look up on the calendar, it was the 9th day of Av, a black day in Jewish history anyways. Without this expulsion, basically the story of Spanish Jewry comes to an end. 700 years the Jews lived in Spain. Many of those years were good, the golden age of Spain, but by 1492, you couldn't find a Jew in Spain. What happened was the numbers are hard to come by because there wasn't really a good company that took statistics. But basically, it was broken down evenly. 250,000 converted and 250,000 left. Among those that left was one called Don Yitzhak Abarbanel. I often talk about Abarbanel Saturday morning when we talk about the Chumash and explaining the commentary on the Torah. I talk about this man. This man was a favorite of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He even rose to the position of finance minister. Finance minister in Catholic Spain. This is where Don Yitzhak Abarbanel was. When they expelled the Jews, they offered for him to stay. They said, they can go, but you, no, we like you. You stay. And he says, where am I going to daven Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv? I'm going to be the only Jew in Spain. I'm not going to have a minion. What am I going to do? Listen to the shofar and all of that stuff? So he decided he's also leaving. He went, and then he went to Portugal, and eventually he went to Italy, where he passed away in Italy. But while he was doing all of this and working for the government, he also wrote many great commentaries on the Torah, and especially Abarbanel is one of the. It's a beautiful, beautiful commentary, on the oral tradition as well as the written tradition. So we see here, unfortunately, at the conclusion of Spain, did not come to a glorious end. Many of the Jewish people could not withstand the pressure, of the Inquisition, and they actually converted and they stayed within Spain. Some of them got out later on. Some of the Moranos, those people that lived, quote unquote, a double life. Meaning that they were on the outside, they were Catholic, but at the inside, they were Jewish. I mean, you know what? We can't even begin to imagine. Because I don't think that there was another time in history where Jews actually had to do this. Because, either they killed you, because we'll talk about some other calamities, and experiences throughout Jewish history in Europe. But normally, they just killed you. Fine, they killed you. Now, if you wanted to convert, you converted. Fine. I mean, there's many people that converted. We'll find there were converts later on in Russia. We'll find there were converts in Germany. There was many converts to Christianity. They didn't lack of Jews leaving out. But I don't think that there was an experience such as the Inquisition where you actually had to live a double life, where you wanted to live as a Jew, but you were forced to live as a Catholic under the most extreme conditions. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, if you came to church and, you had to take the Eucharist, you had to eat the wine and the wafer, and they saw that maybe you made a face when the priest gave you the wafer, you went, something that itself, and if you gave an expression, fe, or nu, or oy vey, that itself, just saying oy vey, which of course didn't exist in that time because this is Spain. But you know what? But if you even thought about saying oy vey, you thought about saying oy vey, was enough to get you arrested. And if you were arrested, it's not meaning that they said, okay, you have one telephone call. You have the right to remain silent. Everything that you say will be held against you, but you have a right to an attorney. And if you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Okay? No rights. They arrested you, put you in a dungeon, and if they even thought that you were fooling them, you went through the worst possible things that you could possibly go through. For nothing. For the fact that if you came to a neighbor and they served pig, and you, for whatever reason, you said, maybe not, just that itself was enough for them to go to the Inquisition and say, hey, you know what? I had these neighbors over. I served them, baby back ribs. The guy says to me, I'm a vegetarian. Just for that itself, you could be arrested. Arrested. Friday night, if you didn't show up, if they thought they saw candles in your window, arrested. Everything for whatever little incident that could happen, and they encouraged neighbors to squeal on others. Unfortunately, I would venture to say that many of the Jews squeal on other Jews to show, look, I'm a good Catholic, because I'm giving up my neighbor. I'm talking about my neighbor. This is the kind of insidious way that you try to break down people. You destroy them mentally. You put the fear into them. So not only the fear of the person that gets arrested, but the fear spreads to everybody in town. So if you arrest one person from PCH, everybody else on PCH starts to become better Catholics. They show up early to church. They stay later in church. They sweep up the church. They buy not only the nicest cross, they buy the cross with the gold and the silver and and Yashka hanging from the cross. Everything they buy, they go the extra mile to show that they're better Catholics than. But even if you did that, they could arrest you. Why? Why you buying the more expensive cross? What do you made you you're the Pope? Why do you have to buy the most expensive cross? No, you're compensating. Arrest them. I mean, you couldn't win. You basically couldn't win, in this kind of thing. So the Jews had an experience there in Spain where, it's impossible to imagine how to live. And when they finally were able to get out, it wasn't so good for them either, because they went to Portugal, which let them in for about 2 years, and then in Portugal they said, who needs them? Get out. So they kicked them out, and eventually the Jews made their way either to Israel. Some went all the way to Israel. Some went to Italy. Some eventually settled in Holland, New Amsterdam, the Netherlands. They settled, but out of the Iberian Peninsula that we know today, in Spain and Portugal, there were no Jews. There was no open Jews. They may have been Jews hidden down in the ground, but that ended that experience. The Jews realized that, you can never, there's never a time where you can say, we finally made it, here we are, we're going to stay here forever. There's no forever. Jews have learned that all along. From Babylon, they moved to Spain. From Spain, they moved to Portugal. From Portugal, they moved here, back and forth and back and forth. And that basically ends this, just to give like an idea of what kind of influence Jews had in Spain. In 1935, 1939, they fought a civil war in Spain. You're familiar with the Spanish Civil War. What was a civil war? There was a leftist government, basically, leaning towards. I mean, those were the days Russia was hot in spreading communism, and in Spain in 1935 there was a leftist government. And I'm sure, like any other government, when it gets installed, goes to excesses, and they killed a bunch of priests and a bunch of nuns, and they imprisoned a bunch of people. Came along Franco, General Franco, and led a war between the nationalists and the Republicans. And the nationalists, of course, were aligned with the Catholic Church, those people that were the rightists, versus the Republicans, which at that time were the leftists. It's funny how politics works sometimes, but the Republicans were the leftists on the time, the communists, the leftists, the socialists at that time. Franco also aligned himself with whom? Adolf Hitler. And signed a pact, with Adolf Hitler, and Hitler actually sent soldiers to help the Spanish cause. When Hitler came to Franco to ask for the Jews of Spain, he wanted them to export the Jews of Spain, to the concentration camps. Franco told him, and I mean this is purported. No one was there at the meeting, but Franco purportedly said to him, "Listen, according to your definition, I'm Jewish as well, because everybody here in Spain has Jewish blood. That's the way it is. So don't forget about it. Don't even talk about it, because everybody is Jewish here. If you take the 250,000 Jews that lived in Spain at the time of the expulsion, and you extrapolate them into marrying families, basically 1/4, at least not everybody in Spain, but at least 1/4 of Spanish, the population has some kind of Jewish blood." Elie Wiesel tells an unbelievable story. He was once I think in Madrid. He was giving a lecture. This was in the early 60s or maybe the middle 60s. And after his lecture, a fellow came to him and said, "Please, Mr. Wiesel, I need to show you something. I don't know what it is, but I need to show you something." Yeah, this is already after the lecture at night. He's tired. He wants to go to bed. But the guy is pleading with him, so he takes him to his house. He sits down in his house. The guy takes out a document. He says, "I have no clue what this is talking about. What is this?" It's Hebrew. The guy Wiesel reads the document. This is what they call a shtar yuchsin. This is a book of pedigree. A pedigree. Well, genealogy. He says, "You are Jewish. According to this document, you," and the guy was a Catholic, Shabbat Catholic. I mean, he was a real Catholic. "You are Jewish." And then it was laid out in front of him right there and then. This guy had begat this guy had this guy had that. Anyways, the guy tells him, "Thank you very much for explaining to me." Wiesel leaves, this guy leaves. Fast forward 15 years. Now it's already the late 70s. Wiesel is in the Knesset in Israel. He's in the Knesset in Israel, and he delivers a speech there and everything. Yad Vashem, I think he said he's at the Yad Vashem. He delivers a speech there, and he's walking down the hall. A guy starts chasing him with a beard, and there's no Wiesel. He's going, Dr. Wiesel. He says, "You remember him?" Hold on. He doesn't remember him. He says, "I'm the guy 15 years ago in Madrid. You came to my house with a document." The guy has a beard like this now, a black hat. The whole family moved out of Spain and all of that stuff. Today he's living in Israel, an Orthodox Jew with a big family, etc., etc., etc. But I tell you, we can't even imagine. We can't even imagine how many people that are walking around this world today that are Jewish from these people, from the expulsion from Spain. Today there's a whole section now called crypto Jews. Crypto Jews that live in, many of them live in New Mexico and northern Mexico and other places throughout the world that claim that there is Jewish heritage, and I believe them. Why not, if you think about it? Okay, so it's 500 years, it's a little difficult, to trace your way back, but not to believe. The first Jews in North America that settled were not in the United States, came to Brazil. The first Jews that came to Brazil hundreds of years ago, I guess it was must be like in the early part of the 17th century, in the early 1600s, came from where? These were Marranos. These were people that ran away and ran to Brazil and later they came up to the United States to live it wasn't New York then, it was New Amsterdam. It was New Amsterdam at that time, but this is who they were. These were people that ran away, and they were Marranos. So I do believe that around the world there are, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and possibly millions, probably millions of people that are walking around today that are Jewish over the years, but unfortunately were lost. You know what? And there are organizations that are now trying to bring them back. There's even one shul up in Portland, Oregon, that is made up of crypto Jews. There's a crypto rabbi, but you know how it works in politics. You know what? They try to come in, they say they want to be Jewish, so instead of embracing them, and saying, "Hey, how can we help you?" It's, "How can we not help you? You know, how could we show that you're not Jewish? Maybe you could bring your great-great-grandmother's ksuba, all of that stuff. So it becomes difficult, and you have to have really a tremendous amount of fortitude to work through the Jewish bureaucracy. I mean, to get to Israel and tell them to stamp your passport as Jewish, which is difficult. I mean, you have to bring who knows what. You got to bring back Isabel and Ferdinand, and maybe Torquemada too to tell us. I mean, it was much easier. I don't want to go on there. I shouldn't say that. Okay, I'm going to, because it's taped. You know what? But let's just say like this. That, there are tens of thousands of people throughout the world, millions of people throughout the world who are Jewish because of the expulsion from Spain. We don't know them. Whatever it is, that's basically how it ended. Now, with the expulsion of Spain, we're going to find out later on that the people who were expelled, these were intelligent people, educated people. I mean, they were business people. I mean, the community in Spain was not a poor community. It wasn't that they were made up of indigenous people. I mean, they were very highly educated. Many of them were very, very wealthy. Even the ones that lived as Catholics still continued to do business. And we will find them as they move around the world. We will always come into contact with people that claimed that they have Marrano blood in them. And we'll see the difficulty, not only the difficulty today, but we'll see the difficulty later on in Amsterdam, how it's not so easy to get yourself acclimated in a new community, no matter what you suffered, no matter how much you suffered. You know what? It's not so easy. But let's go now. From Spain, we're going to get on a boat. We're going to travel not a very far distance. We're going to go to France, or we'll travel over the mountains into France, because France has also a tremendous history. France and Germany together. As I'd mentioned to you early on, maybe in the first lecture, when the Jews were exiled from Israel in the year 70, and then again in the year 130, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, many of the Jews were taken forcibly to Rome. Literally put on ships as slaves and forcibly went to Rome. One of them, of course, we know about, what was his name, the historian? Josephus, thank you. Josephus. Now he wrote many of his great works from Rome. Not while he was in Israel, but while he was in Rome. And his name was, we learned before in the first lecture, Yosef ben Matisyahu HaKohen, that he was a Kohen. His name was Joseph, the son of Matisyahu. But later on in Rome, he changed his name to Josephus, and he became the great writer of Jewish history. Now, Jews already had traveled with the Roman legion. The Roman legion went all the way to, where? England. Right? They already reached, but certainly France and Germany, they lost a great battle in Germany, and when they expand the empire. So Jews were already there. Think about that, since the year 1000, that there were Jewish communities in this country. 1,000. I mean, no, not 1,000, 100. What am I talking about? From the year 100, 200, there were Jews there already. So by the time we come and visit there, in the year 800, there have been Jews living in these areas for 600 years. 500 to 600 years already, Jews were there. Charlemagne reunited Germany and Gaul, France, and he put them together under the Christian flag. He wasn't enlightened. At least it tells us so in the books, and encouraged Jews to come, because he knew that Jews bring with them trade, right? Because as we learned last week, we talked about how when the Muslims went across and dotted northern Africa, many of the trade routes were supplied by Jews. So he welcomed Jews to come, set up business, set up shop in Germany and in France, and Jews did that. They settled in southern France. It's beautiful, the French Riviera, beautiful area, Bordeaux and all those, and that whole region. And Jews came there. They set up shop. They set up communities. Northern part in near Paris, in Germany, Mainz, Speyer, and Schum, and Worms. Three cities, one right next to each other, were great centers of Jewish learning. So Ashkenaz, which is what we call now, because versus what did we call Spanish Jewry? Sephardic. Oh, this class is so smart. I'm telling you, you're so smart. But now we call these Jews what? Ashkenazim. Oh, beautiful. I'm telling you, thank God. Okay, so here are Jews living in Ashkenaz. Here and now Jews are living in Ashkenaz. They're living under this guy, Charlemagne, and their communities are growing, and their scholarships are growing, and yeshivas are growing, and everything is growing. Everything is going so far so good. We come upon one of the really people that changed the face of Ashkenazic Jewry, and his name was Rabbeinu Gershom Me'or HaGa'ila. They call him Rabbeinu Gershom, the light of the exile. The light of the exile. Now, for many, he is known for one thing and one thing only, which is sad because he did so many things he enacted, but it's called Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom, the excommunication of Rabbeinu Gershom. And he's known as the father of Ashkenazic Jewry. He was born in the year 960 and passed away in 1040. So we're talking a fellow that lived many, many, many years ago. And his great contribution to Jewry is he brought in monogamy. He forbade polygamy. Because until now, polygamy was okay within Jewry. Because if you look in the Torah, it's clearly that Abraham had more than one wife, Jacob had more than one wife, everybody had more than one wife. And the Talmud, it talks about having more than one wife. Judaism was always a polygamous religion. Rabbeinu Gershom put an end to it. And there's a whole legend of why he put an end to it. Because he himself had two wives and he got into trouble because of his two wives. Having two wives also always referred to the tzara. The second wife was always called the tzara. What's a tzara? Sore, a pain. Okay? Because for those who are married, know that one is plenty. Okay? One is plenty, thank God. If you have one, dayenu. If you're going to pray two, okay, you may step over the border. But Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom forbade. But his enactment only was upon Ashkenazic Jewry. He had no influence on Sephardic Jewry. So Sephardic, under Muslim domain, for many years afterwards, still had polygamous relationships. But Ashkenazic Jewry was forbidden. He gathered together, he made a convention of all of the rabbis of Germany and France. Actually, four separate laws. One was the polygamy. Now, many people wonder why at this particular, why not have it? To the water carrier. Brothers and sisters, and not for one another. Trust me. No matter how prolific you are, 49 number of different the better. I'm talking about women's rights. Never had it, never will. Okay, that's okay. Finished. Not only that, the best. Okay. So this makes a lot of sense to me. This makes a lot of sense to me. You know, take the best and the brightest, the geniuses of. For example, St. Thomas Aquinas, whether you believe in Catholicism, don't believe in Catholicism. Brilliant. Was a gene pool. They take him out of the gene pool. So God forbid that he should have any children that could actually read. All right? They should actually read. Because why have this kind of attitude? Because Jesus himself, as long as we know without reading the Da Vinci Code, I'm not getting into that. Before reading the Da Vinci Code, as far as we know, for 2,000 years, had how many children? 0, because he married how many times? 0. All of the disciples or the apostles married? Zippo. right? Okay, we're not going to get into what the ramifications of that could mean, but let's leave that for a side here, okay? But nonetheless, they didn't get married, and if you read in the New Testament, there is reference to, if you want to really serve Jesus and God, this you'll have to give up all pleasures of the world. Okay, so which tend to believe that you give up everything. So sex is what the Catholic Church looked at as what? A necessary evil. Okay, if you want to get more Catholics, you have to have sex. I'm sorry to say, even they didn't find out a way how to pray and have kids.
But early on, priests did marry.
But not now. Not in the 10th century already.
No, it would change in what, the 4th or 5th?
Maybe the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries. I mean, so somewhere around there. But early on, I think it was pretty early on. Celibacy was brought in. But certainly, I don't think the popes ever married. There may have been a couple of married popes, but officially the popes never married. Priests may have married, and even with that, with the priest being married, even then it was looked at. Okay, you have to, but it's not. I mean, the ultimate is to give up, for it.
Like Augustine, who was the 5th century.
Right. Never married. No, never married. He wanted to marry. He writes, he has conflict. He wanted to marry. So again, this is not a class on Christian sexuality. That you'll have to go to Loyola Marymount if you want to take that class. They offer it. But I just wanted to show you, I'm going to give you 1 second, Susan. I just wanted to show you in the milieu that the Jews were living in now. So as long as they're living under Muslim domain, okay, it's fine. But now they're living under Christian domain. It's already a different story. You see, even the Mormons. The Mormons who are very recent, at the last century, had to give up polygamy in order to be able to enter the union. Because why? Because you got to do what as they say. The way the Christian world runs, that's the way the Jewish world runs. And I think this had a lot to do with it. The fact that they were living around Catholic people in Catholic countries, and that looked at it, and they looked down upon the fact that you had more than one wife. I think this played. Was this the impetus? Was this the driving force? Maybe it wasn't 90%, but it certainly didn't hurt that they were living under the Christian rule right now when they implemented the ban on polygamy. There's plenty of companies here in America that if you want to sign up to fight a war, got plenty of wars for you all over the world. Why? Because mercenaries know one thing. They're not becoming, in those days when you came back from battle, it wasn't that they had, why don't you go to college and you become a computer engineer? Or you could go fix televisions. No. When you came back to war, what are you looking for? Another war. Because it was very lucrative. Because if you were successful, what did you do? Everybody raped and pillaged, baby. That was what it's all about. Okay? So here, Pope Urban came up with an ingenious idea, because he said like this: what does every religion ask for? For one thing, what? Coming of Mashiach, right? Christians wait for the second coming, Jews wait for the first coming, the Muslims wait for the 12th Imam to reappear. Everybody's waiting for something. Because you can't have, hey, we're there right now, because the world is in a terrible shape, so you have to wait for some kind of a world, for someone to come and save the world. Pope Urban argued very ingeniously that how could Jesus come back? If Jesus came back today, what would happen? He goes to Bethlehem. Who's he going to meet there? Arabs. He's going to meet the Muslims. Then he's going to go back to where he was crucified. Who's hanging out there? Muslims. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is under Muslim domain. All the churches in Israel, all the holy sites are under Muslim domain. And we sit here in Europe and we're going to take it? We can sit here and look at each other and say that we're good Catholics, while that place over there is under, and he didn't even call them Muslims. He had a different name for them, because of course you're always going to make your enemy into nobodies, right? Heretics and apostates, and then the worst kind of people. Who knows what they do there, and back and forth. So, you know what, if you have unemployment, and you have this, and you have that, and you have charismatic leaders like Peter the Hermit, who we'll get to in a minute. Hey, this is an opportunity to see the world. Okay, you're not going to go there by train. You're going to have to walk there. But nonetheless, how often do you get to walk across Europe? At the same time killing people and enjoying yourself while whistling a happy tune. Right? Das Lavot. That was what? That was the cry of, thus wills the Lord. That was the cry of the Crusades. in the name of the Lord, with their big crosses on their shields, they marched. The first crusade was an abysmal failure, an unbelievable failure, because they didn't organize. The guy Peter the Hermit, who was an anti-Semite. He was a charismatic guy, because he didn't eat and he didn't sleep and he looked like a Reisvas, who knows what. But he certainly didn't know how to fight wars. They barely made it out of Europe. They maybe made it to Turkey. They fell apart. But what they did do was they went on an anti-Semitic rage. That everybody knows. Everybody knows how to do that. The first crusade, everybody knows how to do that. So they came to places like Worms and Speyer and Mainz, as I mentioned before. They massacred the people. I mean, I could tell you dates, the times, when they were killed and back and forth. I mean, tens of thousands. We don't even know exactly, how many Jews. But nonetheless, look in 1096, just over here, 1096, in the Jews of Speyer were massacred May 3rd. And May 18th, they went to Worms. May 25th, a matter of month. In 1 month, 3 communities were all massacred out. And in the worst kind of massacres they were. But they were unsuccessful. The next year, the second crusade went. But this time already, they were better organized. And they went under the leadership of a fellow by the name of Godfrey of Bouillon. Now, they tell an interesting legend about this guy, Godfrey of Bouillon. He knew Rashi. Okay? He knew Rashi. Just suspend your imagination for a second, okay? You're not engineers now. Now you're artists for a second, okay? Okay? And Rashi says to Rashi, I am going to fight a crusade in Israel, and I'm going to throw the Jews out of Israel, and I'm going to take over under the banner of Christianity. And Rashi says to him, I promise you, you will not come back here even with 3 horses. You will not come back with your big army. He says, we'll see. Anyways, to make a long story short, in the summer of 1096, a year after Pope Urban called for the first crusade, the second crusade left, they already knew how to fight, because already they were organized. They were military men that led this. This was not led by charismatic Christian priests or bishops. They were led by people that fought wars, kings that knew how to manage a war. And they actually went into Israel and they caught Acre, they caught even Beirut, Jaffa, Ashkelon, all parts of Turkey, Jordan, Syria, and Israel, and Yerushalayim. They said in Yerushalayim, the massacre was so bad against the Muslims and the Jews that the horses were up to their knees in blood. That's how bad it was in Yerushalayim, how many people they killed. And he himself crowned himself in 1099 King of Jerusalem. King of Jerusalem. He battled. But he comes back to France, afterwards. Then the Crusades win the battle but lose the war, because they're in constant battle with the Muslims back and forth and back and forth. He comes back to France after being booted out of Jerusalem with 3 horses, because Rashi says he won't even come with 3 horses, so he came with 3 horses. But the legend is, as he came through Troyes, there was like a column that he had to come through, like an arch, and one of the arches, a brick came loose, and it fell down and killed one of his horses. So he only walked through with 2 horses, just to fulfill the wishes of Rashi that said, you will not come back here with 3 horses. That's what it was. Anyways, long story short, now the Muslims say, oh yeah, you think you're going to capture Jerusalem and we're going to take it sitting down? We're not going to take it sitting down. We talked about last week, Maimonides was the doctor to whom? Saladin, thank you very much. Saladin comes and he recaptures Jerusalem, and then the epic battle of all battles at that time take place in the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade left and already close to the 12th century. It was led by 3 kings, 3 European kings. Philip of France, Frederick of Germany, and the most famous of them all, Richard the Lionhearted. Later on, he would go later on, Louis the Ninth. Saint Louis would go on a crusade later on. But here were 3 kings, Philip of France, Frederick of Germany, and Richard the Lionhearted. They went with a massive army to retake things. And they said, if you read the chronicles of these battles, it's just unbelievable what happened. I mean, what would happen was they would have 200,000 here, 200,000 there, and all of a sudden they would give, ring a bell, and boom, they would fight. There's only one big difference. The Muslims had one big advantage. And what was that? It's called home court advantage, numbers. So if you lose 10,000 in the Middle East of Muslims, you could just call like this for another 10,000 to show up. You lose 50,000, you bring another 50,000 warriors in. The Europeans couldn't do that. And eventually Saladin drove them out. There would be altogether 5 different crusades. 5 or 6 different crusades. There was a children's crusade. St. Louis IX also tried a crusade, but they all failed miserably. They couldn't dislodge the Muslims from Israel. But what it caused in Europe was this just in the 14th century. Just to give you an idea what kind of anti-Semitism there was in France itself. In 1 century, the Jews were booted out, let in, and booted out again. 3 times they were booted out. Then they said, okay, let them back in. Then they booted out again, but back in, booted out again, and back in. So it was a very, very horrible time. The Middle Ages, the beginning of the Middle Ages, was a very horrible time for Jews living in this part, in Germany and France, because you never knew who's going to be the king, what's going to be the relationship, back and forth, in and out. It was crazy. It was literally crazy. But there's always, whatever happens in history, you got to know that things will pass. I mean, as bleak and as dark as they seem at this moment, what's going to happen is something else is going to happen, and it's going to all of a sudden take this focus off the anti-Semitism, and eventually we are going to move on. This has been our experiences for 2,000 years. We know this. That's why we always have hope that no matter how bleak it's going to be, even during the Holocaust, I mean, where they were killing, I mean, we couldn't have it bleaker than that somewhere, somehow, there's going to be a better tomorrow. That this is going to end, and whoever's going to remain is going to still tighten up, hold it tight for right now, circle the ship, whatever you have to do, wait it out the storm, and eventually things will calm down. And that was the attitude of Western European Jewry. What happened was that something brought to Europe such devastation that made them forget all about the Crusades. They forgot all about the Crusades, because don't forget that with the failure of the Crusades, they had to blame somebody. So you're not going to blame the Muslim. You have the Jews there. Plus, what the Catholics did was unbelievable what the church did. They pushed the Jews into finance that they themselves didn't want to do. So what did the Jews create? A little thing called banking. Now, it wasn't only the Jews, were not only the bankers. There were other kind of bankers as well. But the Jews, since Catholics by law could not charge usury, you could not charge interest, so who could charge usury? The Jew. So the Jew charged, and he charged 10%, 20%, even up to 50%, 60% of the loan. So if you took a loan for $100, you could end up paying $1,000 for that loan. Now, what happened if you had no money to pay? What was the easiest thing to do? Kick the Jew out. That's it. But then when you needed capital, what did you do? Bring the Jew back. You needed less capital, kick him out, bring him in, back and forth and back and forth. And that's basically what it went through these 2 centuries, in Eastern Europe. And again, different parts. I'm talking about in Western Europe, where we're talking about France and in Germany. In the middle of the 14th century, the most horrific epidemic in the history of the world took place. It's called the Black Death. The Black Death. The Black Death killed probably a quarter of Europe. I mean, we don't even know, but it between maybe even more, between a half and a third of the population. Probably they estimate 25 million people died because of the black. But it's hard to know the figures but whole towns. If you read the chronicles of the people that wrote about the Black Death, whole towns died. Literally, in a matter of a month, you could have an entire town completely. They didn't have no clue where this came from. They had no idea how to stop it. But interestingly enough, the Jews suffered the least, because we know now what it was caused by rats and dirty and infection and spread like wildfire, because it was all, the cleanliness wasn't the top priority in Europe at that time. And 25% to a half, more, 33 to a half of 50% of all of the people in Europe perished. What happened after the Black Plague? You know what? People began to realize, eat, live, and be merry, for tomorrow you're going to die. right? Because today, if we don't live for today, if everything we're worried about what's going to happen after we die and what's going to happen in heaven, forget about it. A whole new feeling swept over Europe. Now, where does that come from? That comes from Isaiah. It's a quote from Isaiah. But they took it seriously. If you don't live for today, and for right now, you see what happens? Whole families, towns, cities, villages, all wiped out. So a new spirit was coming to ride over Europe. This spirit was going to have a profound effect upon Jews and upon the local leadership of what happens in Europe. Because what was one of the great powers of Europe? The Catholic Church. The Catholic Church had its tremendous, unbelievable power that it held sway over people. Already in the 13th and 14th centuries, there was cracks in the church, because for a while there were two popes. There was a pope in Avignon, and there was a pope in Rome, and not only then there was a third pope that sprung up also, so there was three popes that were going on. So there was already small cracks, and there was already, people were already revolting against the Catholic Church before Martin Luther came around. There was already revolts, in Slovakia and in Czechoslovakia. They were already cracking away at the Roman Catholic Church. But in Western Europe, in France and in Germany specifically, it would take on a completely different dimension during the 16th century. A completely different dimension. Renaissance would come in. People would start looking into science differently. They would look at the world more critically. Dogma was being challenged. I mean, these were things that were never done before. Absolutely never done before, and until ultimately the Reformation. The Reformation, we all understand that in 1517, a fellow by the name of Martin Luther challenged the Catholic Church. Now, why did he challenge the Catholic Church? Because many people had challenged, but he challenged them on 95 questions he posted to the church door. What was one of his biggest complaints? The indulgences. What are indulgences? That's an incredibly creative idea. I wish I could implement it here in Shul. If I could implement indulgences in Shul, we would build a Shul like you'd know tomorrow. What's indulgences? Indulgences is that the Catholic Church collects money on the understanding that your sins will be forgiven. Your sins will be forgiven. That means, if you sinned, you pay up, you give away. Okay. How did they do this? Because they said like this, they made a very simple accounting. To get into heaven, you need 100 points. Let's say you need 100 points to get into heaven. So over the time you accumulate, you do a mitzvah, you get 1 point. You do an avera, you lose the point. You go back and forth. It's like a game of snakes and ladders. You ever play snakes and ladders? So you do a mitzvah, you go up. Then you commit adultery, you go down. You help build a church, you go back up. You commit again adultery, you go back down. You keep... What?
No pun intended.
No pun intended. No. Up and down, back and forth, okay? So what happens is, at the end of your life, you're about 20 short. You only made 80. Where does the Catholic Church have the right to give you 20 points? So what happens is you take a guy like St. Augustine. St. Augustine is a saint. He accumulated in his lifetime 10,000 points, okay? You don't need 10,000 points to get into heaven. You need 100. So what happens to the other 9,900? They get to deposit in a vault. And who has the key to the vault? The Pope. Of course. So if the Pope wants, he could take 20 points and give it to you. So the priests were under tremendous pressure at this time to sell indulgences. All over Europe, priests were pushing indulgences, pay up. Then once people said, I was forgiven, they said, now we'll sell for the future. If you want to sin, let's say you'd like to have a sin. Okay? If you want to have a sin, let's say, you want to eat meat on Friday, which was a big no-no in those days. If you'd like to have a hamburger Friday morning, it'll cost you $50. And go ahead, because we'll give you the points. When this came out, this was so cynical that, you know what? Martin Luther couldn't take it anymore, challenged the church. You know what? The church broke up. They fought wars, the 30-year wars. We all know what happens in Europe. The Catholics fought the Protestants. Whole countries fell to Protestantism. Look at Scandinavian countries, Belgium, others, northern countries all fell. Germany split in half Catholic, half Protestant. The southern countries remained loyal to the Pope. Spain, France, Italy, these countries remained loyal. The northern countries, the Low Countries, and Belgium and Holland, England, They all became Protestants. They all became Protestants. It was fought, but that's the way. Well, how does that affect us? Because in the beginning, Jews didn't know who to really go for. Because on one hand, Protestants claimed more freedom. But the Catholics were the authorities. You don't want to go with the revolutionaries, you don't know. So back and forth. And in the beginning, Martin Luther was very friendly to the Jews. He said, you know why they're not converting? Because we're bad to them. But if we be nice to them, but later on, he started to write against the Jews. Of Jews and their lies, that Jews are pigs and we should burn the shoals and, etc., etc. They should live in barns. I mean, he's a crazy guy. He was a crazy guy. But with this, swept in this whole idea of the Renaissance, of learning and challenging dogma. That turned out positive for the Jews. Because once the Catholic Church already, the foundations are shaken, you know what? Then, you're not that tzikocht. Then you're not that passionate. Because everything is now being challenged. Galileo and Copernicus and all these guys, Kepler, are all challenging now dogmas of the Catholic Church, scientific dogmas of the Catholic Church. It opened up a whole idea in Italy and other places. Universities, sprung up. Jews went to universities. More rights were given to Jews. The Protestants in the beginning were better. Some were worse. Back and forth, here and there. You know what? But in this time, in this milieu, Jews began to flourish a little bit. And Europe began to take a completely different look. I mean, if you look at the Protestant countries versus the Catholic countries, and if you look at them as far as productivity is concerned, you look at the powers in Europe. The powers in Europe were, from then on until now, think about that. 1, Britain became a powerhouse, Protestant country. 2, France, Catholic country. 3, Germany, back to Protestant country. Productivity, you can't even compare. You couldn't even compare the economic productivity of the northern countries versus the low. Even today, you fly into Italy at the wrong time. You know what? Forget strike. Either they're striking, or in Spain it's a fiesta, or siesta, everything with a siesta. So 2 hours you could be sitting on the tarmac. They're not doing anything. They don't know nothing. France itself was once a great power, but now it's forget it. With this new, I don't want to get about it. We don't want to talk politics. But yet the northern countries all began to rise up. So there was a whole different shake-up. It was a complete different shake-up in the power in Germany, and Jews felt this as well. Because as soon as the Protestants started to open up and they became a little bit more liberal, we're not talking about England. England expelled their Jews in 1290, and they wouldn't let the Jews in until Oliver Cromwell and the Roundheads were convinced by Menashe ben Israel. There was a fellow, Menashe ben Israel, who convinced Oliver Cromwell to let Jews into England. How did he convince him? Again, it takes a Yiddish cup to think about this. How did he do it? He did it this way. Instead of scratching this way, he did it this way. He said, it's not going to be good for the Jews to come to England. Jews don't want to come to England. You think we Jews want to come to England? It's for your sake you should let Jews into England. He said, my high, why is it good for England? He says, because when Jesus comes back, right? When Jesus comes back, and he's going to look around the whole world, and they're going to say that the Jews were dispersed, and he's going to look around the dispersion. Where are they not? Where are they not? In England. And he's going to ask, why are they not in England? So for your sake, let Jews into England. For your sake, let Jews into England. And for some oddball reason, he agreed with him. He led Jews back into England. Oliver Cromwell led Jews back into England. Not based upon that it's going to make the country any better, but he put Jews in England. So anybody, Shakespeare, who lived before this, probably never even saw a Jew. Although probably there may have been some Jews living in London, 1 or 2 Jews. But primarily, people who say that Shakespeare saw Jews and fashioned the Merchant of Venice, after some Jew, it was an anti-Semite. If you don't meet a Jew, you can't be, whatever it is. That could be debated in Literature 101 down the hall next week. That was the middle of the 17th century. In the 1650s, he ran around. They fought the war because England himself was going through an upheaval between Catholicism and Protestantism, and then Henry VIII, and we all know, and then they threw out the Tudors, and the kings came back. But for a short time, there was no monarchy under Oliver Cromwell. One of the byproducts of the Inquisition was that Jews found themselves now the Moranos found themselves now enmeshed in this whole controversy because there were Jews now in Italy, and there were Jews who went to Amsterdam, and there were Jews that went all over the place, including Israel. And in Israel, they brought with them the study of Kabbalah, because they were very much into Kabbalah in Spain, certainly since the 13th century, the 1250s, Moses de Leon, discovered the Zohar, published the Zohar. He spread out the Zohar throughout the known world. All over the place. So the study of Kabbalah, which was primarily in Spain, now ended up in Israel under the Arizal, who lived in the 16th century, the great Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, Rabbi Chaim Vital. The study of Kabbalah took shape and form into this place. And also, throughout Europe, there was a whole rise up of great scholarship. I mean, the rabbis that lived at this time were named the Rishonim, the firsts, because they came after they were the authors of the Mishnah, then the authors of the Gemara, of the Talmud, then there was the Gaonim. If you remember last week we talked about the 100 Gaonim, and then people who lived in this era, the Rosh, Rashi, the Rambam, were called Rishonim, the firsts of the commentaries. And then later on in the 16th century they go on to what they're called the Acharonim, the latter scholars. We today are called Acharonim, but those days it was an unbelievable amount of scholarship. I mean, if you just imagine that in one town in Svat, in the middle of the 16th century, in the 1530s, you had living in your city, you could go to Shul and daven next to the Arizal, the great Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was the father of modern day Kabbalah, and sitting right next to him was Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote what Moses Maimonides did last week for Jewish law. He condensed it and put it into what he called the Shulchan Aruch, the prepared table. And they pray together in one shul. I mean, the shul still exists now in Tzfat. If you go to Tzfat, you can go to the Arizal's mikveh. You could go to where Moshe Cordovero. It's freezing cold, so you better take a good towel with you because you get out there. But they say whoever goes to the Arizal's mikveh once in their life will not die without repenting. He promised. If you go to this mikveh, you know why? Because when you're in the water, you're saying, "Oh God, it's so cold. Get me out of here. I promise I'm going to be good." If you don't catch pneumonia, that's probably what he meant. In that very same shul, you had two of the great luminaries, of the past 500 years were living in that shul, and so this period of learning was just exceptional. It was just book after book, scholar after scholar. Overall, it was an unbelievable productive era. A tremendous productive era. It's at 9 o'clock already. Time flies. We don't even get into 2 years already. Time is flying here. I want to go into just for a few minutes. All right, just for a few minutes. I want to talk about one specific country, which I think plays an enormous part. And that's Holland. Before we get into Germany, Holland. Because Holland is a very interesting country. It's a very interesting country, Holland. Once upon a time, we don't view Holland as a big world leader, but once upon a time, Holland was a world leader. Certainly in the Middle Ages, they controlled here the United States. This was what they called the trading company. What was the first name of the? He worked for them, Peter Stuyvesant. It was I don't think it was called the New Amsterdam Trading Company, but the Royal Dutch Trading Company. The Royal Dutch Trading Company. They controlled the trade here in the United States. But they were a powerful force. They were a Protestant country, progressive, Christian, but Protestant. They allowed Jews in, especially after them. A lot of ex-Moranos came in there, and among them was a fellow that was going to really have a tremendous impact not only on Jews, but he was going to have a tremendous impact on the world. Now I'm jumping a little bit because next week we're going to go back in time a little bit, but I want to finish off, at least talk about him a little bit. The Jews in Amsterdam were made up of two types of people. One, people that were there for centuries, that lived in Holland, throughout, however they ended up in Amsterdam, and the newcomers. Same problem that they faced under Rabbeinu Gershon. Same problems they faced under Rabbeinu Gershon. Because he was, people came after the Inquisition. Were they Jewish? Were they not Jewish? Back and forth. No. Fine. They weren't. They let them in. One of the families that came was a family called Spinoza. The Spinoza family. And had this boy by the name of Baruch Spinoza. Now, Baruch Spinoza, by all accounts, there's many biographies about him. They all agree that he was a very precocious child. His father educated him in the ways of the Torah. He had a bar mitzvah. He laned in the shul. He did everything a bar mitzvah bacher did. Gave a speech. Was a brilliant kid. Knew how to learn. Knew his Talmud. Knew everything. But he was very precocious, and he was very curious, very, very curious, and he couldn't get the answers that he was seeking, and especially was a philosophical bent to it, and questioning why. Now today, if you ask why, you go to Yeshiva University. There are places set up. You can go. You can debate. You can talk. You people will listen to you. We're not as self-conscious like we were in those days. The Jews were very self-conscious. And they had and he had many questions they couldn't answer. At the very same time that he was growing up, there was also a fellow that he saw that was just, it was a terrible tragedy. Uriel da Costa was his name, and Uriel da Costa was a heretic. He may have been a little insane, but he wrote a pamphlet against Judaism. They excommunicated him from the congregation, and when they excommunicated him, they made him lay down on the doorpost, on the lintel over there, and they made everybody in shul walk over him as a sign of penance. Spinoza saw this. He respected Da Costa. Da Costa was a bright guy. Well, you embarrass him in public. It had an effect upon him, and he decided after a while, you know what, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, this is not for me. It's not for me. You know what? You can't answer my questions. No one's interested. There was no debating. He left. And he left Amsterdam. He moved to The Hague. And he made his living on, he was a lens grinder. Made glasses. He made glasses. He made glasses for microscopes and other things. Probably this led to his early death because he worked in a room with no ventilation. So who knows what he breathed in at that time over there. Spinoza was to say that he was brilliant. I'm going to say Spinoza's brilliant. Like now it's dark. I mean, you don't have to give him any approbations. We know what he did was he was the first, I believe. Even though there was philosophers before him, he was not the first philosopher. There was certainly philosophers before him, but I believe that he was the first to openly challenge the divinity of the Bible. To say that the Bible was not written by God. It's a man-made, authored book. Now, we could go into a whole discussion about it, and maybe we'll give a class one day about it, who knows, down the line. But suffice to say that you don't say that even in a Protestant country, because Protestants still believe in the divinity of the Bible. And even as liberal as they were, and as willing as they were to live with their Jewish neighbors, this they were not willing to take. So his first treatise, he wrote anonymously. And many of his works he wrote anonymously, that no one knew. No one knew what he wrote. He also denied even the existence of God. The existence of God, that God doesn't exist. I mean, this is crazy. How could God not exist? Well, he doesn't. You may not like it. You may think that I'm crazy. You may want to argue with me, but I'm telling you that God does not exist. Not your God. There is a God. He believed in a God, and he keeps writing about God, Spinoza, but his God is pantheism. His God is pantheism. His God is the God of ideas. His God is the God of nature. His God is the God of self-fulfillment. That's God. Not some guy sitting up there in heaven, with a little puppet show pulling you. And the way he described the Bible, what he did to the Bible was just basically destroyed it. And believe me, it's not hard. It's not very difficult. Because if you take the first couple of sections that we learned a couple of weeks ago from Bereshis and Noach, what kind of people did God create? The worst kind of people. Two, Adam and Eve, terrible people. Cain and Abel, terrible people. This guy, terrible. That guy, terrible. How horrible, terrible. The story's not written well. The story doesn't make any sense. Everything, Abraham with the angels, this baby stuff. Abraham and angels coming, come on, you tell this in 3rd grade, 2nd grade to your kids. This is the greatness of the Bible. And he kicked out the very foundations of the Bible. And then he went after Maimonides. And he said, Maimonides, as smart guy as Maimonides was, you can't have your cake and eat it, Maimonides. You want to be both a theist and you want to be a philosopher? You can't. You take either one of the other. Either you're a theist, either you believe in the divinity of the Bible, but don't say you're an Aristotelian. Don't talk about the possibility of philosophy. Or if you want to be a philosopher and you want to be open-minded and you want to be rational, you want to be logical, then you have to give up your theism. You can't have both. Wow. I mean, this was a revolution. I mean, you talk about the revolutions of revolutions. I mean, communism and socialism and whatever it was. This was a revolution. This guy challenged religion. I mean, and the Jews were afraid. So the Jews excommunicated him. First thing they did was booted him out. They didn't walk over him because by this time he was already long gone in The Hague and he never came back. But they booted him out. As a matter of fact, we talked about it. If you go to Holland now and you look at the registry, you see Baruch de Spinoza's name is erased. They took his name out of the registry of members. Needless to say, he never paid membership again, saved us $40 so he can use it on some other stuff that he used. Now, I just finished an interesting book. I think it's called Explaining Spinoza. It's a small little book put out by the Schoken Publishing Company. They're going through a whole series of books, and some writer wrote about Spinoza, and they tell an interesting story. We want to rehabilitate Spinoza, right? We want to say, Spinoza is not such a bad guy. Maybe he was misunderstood. Maybe if someone had told him, hey, you know what, Baruch, take it easy. Maybe if his family had been nicer to him, because his family excommunicated him, his sisters wouldn't talk to him, his brothers wouldn't talk to him, no one talked to him. He had a very few friends that would communicate with him. He wrote all of his treatises and he sent them out through Europe, undercover, and he had to have special people supporting him. I mean, you couldn't, he was a leper. You couldn't hang around with this guy. You think he was a popular guy walking into a cafe and everybody says, hey, Spinoza today may be popular. But in those days, he was a bad guy. This was a bad person that you were hanging around with. All right? So the people that took a chance, hung around him. She writes at the end of the story a very, very interesting little story. I'm not so sure if she made it up or she didn't make it up or, someone tells a story. Spinoza went back to Amsterdam. He went back to Amsterdam. And we don't know until this day, because he doesn't write about his feelings towards Judaism, what he felt, because he died at a very young age. He was born in, was he born like in 1632, and he probably died in 77 or something like that. Maybe how old? That's 40-something years old. He died as a young man, and he never really writes about his feelings towards Judaism. Doesn't write whether he looked back, doesn't look back, any regrets. Doesn't write if he had any regrets. But she tells a story that he came back to Amsterdam. At the very time he was standing on a bridge, in a distance, there's a shul that was dedicating a Sefer Torah. Okay, so. Here's the guy, here's Spinoza. By this time he's not called Baruch anymore. Now he's called Benedictus or Benedict, whatever. And he's standing on the bridge and he's like looking at the scene of the Jews with, how you dedicate a Torah? Yeah, outside you have a chuppah and what we did over here, and you take the Torah and everybody's joyous, they have candles and everybody is singing and children are singing, they're waving the flags and everything. And he's standing on the bridge and she's kind of speculating what's going through his mind at that time. Is it going through his mind at that time that there's something, maybe she wants to believe in her heart of hearts that something he's saying to himself a regret, that he would have loved to come back to Judaism, or he's standing there with absolutely a frozen expression where you can't tell what's going on in his mind. But she wants to believe, please, sometimes you want to believe against everything else, against all hope, that this great man, when we call him great in the sense that, great of his convictions and great in his courage, to write what he believed in, that this guy that was was such a pillar of Western philosophy had in his heart some kind of Judaism. Something was still beating. There was a Jewish heart over there. We'll never know the answer to this question because his family only showed up after he died. After he died and a letter went out to his remaining siblings, then they showed up to The Hague. And they said, we'll take this, we'll take that, we'll take this, we'll take that. The only thing he's left that we know was this manuscripts to one of his benefactors that, for the sake of philosophy of the Western world, didn't destroy them, kept them, and wrote them, and we know the rest of the story, that forever since that time, Spinoza has been the challenge to all religious people, to answer this question: where are you on the side? Are you here or are you there? And next week we'll go on and we'll try to talk a little bit about some of the responses and how they grew up in Eastern Europe and the whole building of Eastern European Jewry, because we'll leave France, we'll leave Germany for a little bit, we'll move on to now Poland and Russia, where new centers of Judaism are picking up, and we'll pick up the story next week with that. All right? All right. All right. At this time, we will entertain certain questions. Don't ask me about Spinoza's philosophy. I don't know much. You have to go to a fellow in Boston. His name was Harry Wolfson. He was a professor of philosophy at Harvard. He himself was a Litvak. He learned in the yeshiva in Slobodka, which was, we'll talk about next week a little bit, the rise of the yeshiva movement. He came from a town called Austrian. He came here to America the early part of the 1900s. I think it was before the war, maybe in the 30s. A brilliant fellow. But yeshiva was not his bag. He became eventually professor of philosophy at Harvard. And if you want to read the seminal book on Spinoza, is by everybody by far agrees that Wolfson, 2 volumes, Spinoza. If you want to know more, not biographical. This is not, Spinoza running away and Spinoza sitting down and Spinoza eating, spinach for breakfast. This is his real philosophy, something like that. You buy Wolfson's books. Now, Wolfson himself was an interesting guy, never married. When I was in Boston, I knew people that knew Wolfson, that went to Wolfson's house, and they said Wolfson had in his kitchen, literally in his kitchen, you open up the oven, there was books in there. He never cooked, this guy. Never, ever cooked.
That's a good idea.
Well, that's a good idea. The women definitely liked that idea. The women liked that idea. But at one time, when the people knew this, he never married. He also, besides writing major works on Spinoza and on Plato, which was a first century Jewish scholar, lived in Alexandria, he also wrote a major work on the Kalam. The Kalam is Islamic philosophy. He wrote 2 major works on the Kalam. And when someone asked him why the Kalam, he said this became his Vietnam. What happened was he was doing research on a paper, and he came across some philosophers, Islamic philosophers that he didn't know much about. He spent the next 10 years engrossed in Islamic philosophy, and he couldn't extricate himself. So America couldn't get out of Vietnam. He couldn't get out of this thing. And the more he tried to get out, the more involved he was. So he read another one. So he had to read all the works of this guy. And then he had to write all the works of this guy. And he was an unbelievable guy who, just to give you an example of what kind of a person he was once invited to address the Board of Trustees of Harvard. And he said to the president, don't make me do this because I'm not a speaker. I know philosophy. What am I going to talk to these guys about? They said, no, please, Dr. Wolfson, you're here. Please give a talk. So, give a talk, he's going to give a talk. What's he going to talk? Who made up the Board of Trustees of Harvard in the 1940s and 1950s? It was all white guys. White Protestants, WASPs, they made up. And here was this short little Jew, professor of philosophy. He gets introduced, and he delivers a speech, 15 minutes in Hebrew, 15 minutes in Latin, and 15 minutes in English. And he sits down. When later they asked him, "My hi," when the president said, "What for?" He says, "I wanted to show them that I knew a few different languages, that's all." It was simple. What am I going to talk about? So he spoke in 3 different languages to these, to the Board of Trustees to show them that, a Jew can also be a scholar. They didn't believe it in that days. But if you want to really get into Spinoza, which I'm sure no one wants to get into Spinoza. I mean, is anybody interested in finding out the philosophy of Spinoza? Then you go read, Wolfson's tombs on Spinoza's philosophy. Are there any questions on what we talked about in Eli?
I have a question from last week.
Okay.
And that was the short period of time, it seemed like when Muhammad wrote his book
In the Quran.
And he was successful.
Oh.
It was in the short period of time. I just don't understand what made it so successful.
Well, in history, everything is timing. Everything is timing. And timing at that time is just like if you look around the major trends of great political or religious movements, you need to have the people willing to take the message. You either have to be at the end of the Roman Empire, where the people are willing to accept this whole idea of a Messiah and a creator, and and Jesus. So that's Christianity swept. Here, what he was able to do was instill a certain pride in nomadic Arabian tribes, because what were they? They were nomads and Arabs at that time, and give them and bind them together. How? With a message of hope. Because God is coming. God shows you this is reality, this is real. And if the message resonates enough, and the key is that you need to have a certain critical mass. Once you reach that critical mass, whether it's 50,000, 10,000, 100,000, whatever that number is, all of a sudden it's going to blow like an atomic bomb. Because everybody around there, once already this becomes popular, and the word spreads, and hey, the guy's a miracle worker, he knows what he's talking about, he talks to angels and talks to this, and you're talking to a crowd that's eager to listen to you, then you have things blowing your way. Maybe 100 years before, 100 years later, may not have worked. But at this particular time, their particular need was this message of submission to one God, to be good to each other. You take the 5 tenets of Islam, it's all about community, right? Because it's submitting to God, but you have to give charity. You got to go up to Mecca, to the Hajj once in your lifetime. You have to pray 5 times a day. You got to be good to your neighbors and all of that stuff. This was a message, and in the beginning he did the same thing like Martin Luther, like everybody did. You know what? The Jews will convert because, we're much closer than Christianity. What's Christianity? Christianity is idolatry, even though in the Quran there are 2 great prophets, Moses and Jesus. They are great prophets, but Muhammad is the ultimate in prophet. And, just keep going. And once you hit the critical mass, that's the rest is history. The rest, you can't stop it. So it becomes an unstoppable force until someone physically stops it. But in those days, there was no one else physically ready to do that.
I was going to ask, did he literally have a Torah in front of him when he was?
No, he had written the Quran.
But where did he get these ideas from?
Oh, he must have read. He must have read. He must have read. Sure, he was familiar with the Torah, with the New Testament. I'm sure he's familiar with that. I mean, a lot of things in the Quran are taken. I mean, he was obviously familiar with different aspects and mitzvahs and all of these things. So certainly he was. No one comes up with things out of the clear blue sky. No one does that except the Book of Mormon. But besides the Book of Mormon, he based his philosophy basically. And again, politically, there were times, the better times, worse times, that we talked about last week about his relationship with the Jews of Medina, that were, he had business with the Jews in Medina, and he hoped for sure that they would definitely join his cause early on. They didn't. He got angry, he slaughtered the people, changed the Shabbos to Friday. They prayed not to Jerusalem, but to Mecca, and other things back and forth. So, of course, anybody, listen, if, today, we look at Islam a lot different than they looked at Islam 300-400 years ago, because now Islam has become not Islam, but Islamic fascists, have become our implacable foes right now. And if you look at anti-Semitism, it's a lot worse in the Muslim world than it is in the Christian world. I mean, a lot worse, there. So, but over the centuries, there were many times, that Jews and Muslims got along. I mean, the Muslims' religion is a lot closer in theology than Christianity is, to Jews, etc., etc. And like many religions, like many religions, the Quran has, and I'm certainly no expert on the Quran, and read bits and pieces of it, has within it pieces of love, that if you want to find it, you'll find a lot of love in the Quran, and you will also find a lot of warfare and hatred in the Quran, just like you'll find in many religious tombs. And you'll pick and choose what you want to believe is the most important part. If you want to believe in peace and in harmony, you will live in peace and in harmony with your neighbors, and you will find the source in the Quran just like you find in the New Testament. If you want to fight a war and convert everybody else, you will find that in the Quran just like you will find it in the New Testament and other places.
One of the problems is that relates to the law of abrogation, where something on a temporal basis, that which is written later, supersedes that which is written earlier. So early on, there may have been all of the love and all of this good stuff.
Universal peace.
But later on, with the warfare and the concept of intifada, etc., that actually replaces earlier tenets.
Well,
Even though they're fond of quoting all of these things, but if they're a true believer in the Quran, then they accept this law of abrogation, which is very central in the Islamic religion.
I believe me, I'm not here to defend Islam. I'm not an Islamic scholar, but I would venture to say like this. You will find in every religion what you want to look for it and find in there. In every religion. You want to find within Judaism a cause to do harm to others. I can guarantee you, you will find in the Torah the same type of issue. The people of Amalek, if they had a constituency here and they had a lobby on Capitol Hill, what do you think they would say? How do you think they would argue their case? They would say that we're being persecuted for what? For going to war 3,000 years ago. That's why you're persecuting us today, because our grandfathers fought a war 3,000 years ago. You know, we're the people of Canaan and the people of the Jebusites and all of those things. You know, would argue the same way that that the Torah is a book of not intolerant, completely intolerant of the indigenous people, because what does God say to do to them when we come in there? You know, so you can find.
That's been reinterpreted.
Okay, but so you know,
The Quran has not been.
That's where we have to. That's their challenge. Their challenge is to where do you want to live? Do you want to live in the 7th century or do you want to live in the 21st century? That's a challenge I think that they're facing right now. If you want to live in the 7th century, because there was a time that Islam was progressive. There was a time that Islam was putting out philosophy, and they were putting out the poetry and all of this stuff, and it wasn't living in the 7th century of jihad. Look, Iran for many years was our biggest ally. It was Israel's biggest ally, and no one had a problem then, with them. So I think this is their challenge. Their challenge is to say to the world, where are we living? Are we living in the 7th century of jihad against the world, the 8th century, the 9th century, or are we living in the 21st century? But I'm not an apologist for Islam and whether we can, for us, of course, our whole issue is Israel in the Middle East. And can you come to terms with them, and can you make peace with them? I don't know. I mean, that you have to ask, smarter people like Bernard Lewis and others like that. But a religion, I believe, has to go through a metamorphosis. Because every religion.
That's a religion that has not metamorphosed.
Well, that's their challenge. I think that's their challenge, and that's our challenge.
That's kind of a soft way of phrasing it.
But what are you going to do? What should we do? Should we go to war against the Muslim world?
At least be aware.
Oh no, I think we're aware, but you have to understand. There's one.
The academia is aware.
I think they're aware. I think everybody's aware of it. Whether you have to choose what you want to do about it and what you want to do. I think people understand that people like Osama bin Laden and that ilk, and maybe there's tens of millions of them, would like to destroy Western civilization and put in Sharia here in it. I don't think this is a you have to be a great scholar in Harvard University to realize that.
It states in the Quran that the world has to be under Sharia law. That's not subject to interpretation. They say if you're a true Muslim, you believe it.
Okay, so the next question is, what do we do about it? So what do we do? Not allow Muslims in this country? Do we close the borders to Muslims? Do we expel the Muslims from this country?
You do what the Australians do. They said, you want Sharia law, then you go somewhere.
You go somewhere else. Yeah, but if you ask a Muslim here, I don't think a Muslim here in Orange County is going to say that to you.
Are you kidding?
No, they will not say to you.
I've heard it. I've heard
Here
it.
in the United
In the
States,
United States.